Welcome to Relaxing Subjects. Settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let the weight of the day sink down through the mattress and away, and let your breathing slow to the rhythm of these words. Tonight we are going to wander. Not march, not study, not try to reach anywhere in particular. Just wander, the way you might drift down a quiet path with no destination, letting one thing lead softly to the next. And I want to begin with a knife. There was once a cook, and this cook had a blade that would not go dull. Imagine that. Not a magic blade, not a sword out of some legend, just an ordinary kitchen knife in the hand of a man who carved oxen. He had been carving with it for 19 years. 19 years! Think of how many mornings that is, how many turnings of the seasons, how many oxen laid before him. Thousands of them had passed under that edge. And yet the blade, after all of that, was still as sharp as if it had come that very moment from the whetstone, that flat grinding stone where a blade is honed to a fine, bright edge. Fresh, keen, unworn, now. Any cook can tell you what usually happens to a knife. A good cook, they say, changes his knife once a year because he cuts. A poor cook changes his knife once a month because he hacks, he forces it through, he chops at bone, he fights the meat, and the edge chips and blunts against everything hard. But this cook, this one man, had a blade that stayed perfect for 19 years, and the reason is the gentlest secret in the world. He never really cut at all. He only followed the gaps. Hold that image for a moment as you lie there in the dark. A blade that stays sharp precisely because it never forces anything. It slips through the spaces that are already there. It finds where the meat naturally opens, where the joints leave room, and it passes through that emptiness like water finding the low places in a riverbed. There is nothing for the edge to wear against, because it never meets resistance, it never pushes, it never strains. And so it lasts, and lasts, and lasts. That is where we are going tonight, to a book full of images like that one. A book 2,000 years old, from the far side of the world, whose whole quiet teaching is that same idea, told over and over in different clothes. Stop forcing, and you become free. But before the cook, before we return to him and let him finish his carving, I promised you something else, and it is the thing this whole night is named for. So let me set it down now, softly, like laying a single feather on a pillow, and we will come back to it much later when you are further down towards sleep. There was a man who fell asleep and dreamed he was a butterfly. And in the dream he was truly a butterfly, fluttering here and there, going wherever he pleased, light on the warm air, knowing nothing at all of being a man. He had no memory of his human life, no worries, no name to carry. He was simply a butterfly, happy, doing as it wished. And then he woke. And there he was again, unmistakably himself, a man lying still, with the dream fading around him. But now a strange and gentle question had come to sit beside him, and it would not leave. Was he a man who had just dreamed he was a butterfly, or was he, right now, a butterfly dreaming that it is a man? Don't try to answer that. That is the whole point. Just let it hang there in the soft dark of your room, unanswered, the way it has hung unanswered for more than 2,000 years. We will return to the butterfly near the end of our wandering, and when we do, I will tell you the little phrase the book itself gives it, a phrase far gentler than the puzzle it seems to pose. For now, let it be a promise, a quiet promise that this night ends in something as light as wings. So, who was the man who dreamed this dream and wrote of the cook and his blade? His name was Zhuang Zhou, And because in China a teacher is honored with the word Zi, which simply means master, he came to be called Zhuangzi, Master Zhuang, and the book gathered under his name is also called the Zhuangzi. The man and the book, one word for both. You will hear me say it often, softly, Zhuangzi. And you can let it become a familiar sound, the way a river's name becomes familiar to someone who lives beside it. He lived a very long time ago, in the Warring States period of ancient China, somewhere around 369 to 286 years before the Common Era. That is roughly 2,300 years ago. It was a hard and violent age. The very name of it, the Warring States, tells you that the little kingdoms of that land were forever at each other's throats. Armies moving, borders shifting, rulers scheming. And in the middle of all that noise and ambition, here was this one man who seemed to want almost none of it. We know very little about his life, and what little we have comes down to us mostly through an old historian who wrote a century or two after Zhuang Zhou was gone. That historian tells us he came from a town called Meng, in a state called Song. And he tells us that Zhuang Zhou once held a small, humble office. He was, of all things, a minor official at a lacquer garden. A lacquer garden is a plantation of lacquer trees, the trees whose sap was tapped and boiled down to make that hard, glossy black coating you may have seen on old bowls and boxes and furniture. So picture him there, if you like, a modest man among the rows of trees, keeping the accounts of sap and season, not climbing, not conniving, just tending a quiet grove. Whether that story is exactly true, no one can quite say. His life is thin in the record, but the picture fits him. A man who preferred the shade of the trees to the halls of power. And here is the thing about the book he left behind, the thing I most want you to feel tonight. There are two great foundational texts of the tradition we call Daoism, the way of the Tao, the way. One of them you may have heard of. It is the Tao Te Ching, sometimes written Tao Dieng, the small famous book attributed to an older sage named Laozi. And the Tao Te Ching is short. It is solemn. It speaks in gnomic little verses, tight as folded cloth, often addressed to kings and rulers, telling them how to govern by not governing, how to lead by yielding. It is beautiful, but it is grave. It sits with its hands folded. The Zhuangzi is the other one. And the Zhuangzi laughs. Where the Tao Te Ching is short, the Zhuangzi is long and rambling and full of stories. Where the older book is solemn, this one is playful, mischievous, comic. It is crowded with characters, cooks and woodcarvers and swimmers and cripples and talking skulls and giant birds and arguing philosophers, and half of them are plainly invented, made up on the spot to make a point and make you smile. It pokes fun at authority. It refuses to take the serious people seriously. Even old Laozi himself shows up in its pages, not as a distant sage on a mountain, but as a character in the stories, a person who speaks and is spoken to. The two books share their deepest words, the Tao, the way, wu wei, which means non-doing, effortless action, the art of not forcing, zirun, which means the self-so, the natural spontaneity of things being simply what they are. They share the same roots. But one delivers the teaching like a stern grandfather laying down the law, and the other delivers it like a friend telling you a strange and wonderful tale by the fire, letting you laugh your way into wisdom. That is our companion for the night, the laughing one. And so it seems only right that we should wander through it the way it would want to be read, freely, easily, without hurry, letting one tale drift into the next. And it happens that this is exactly how the book itself begins. Its very first chapter carries a title that could be the name of this whole video, the name of tonight itself. In the old language it is Xiao Yao Yu, and in English it is usually given as free and easy wandering. Free and easy wandering, not a destination, not an argument, just a going, light and unforced, the way a leaf goes on a stream. So let us begin where the book begins, with one of the most enormous images ever set down in words, an image so vast it might be the whole night sky pressed into a story. In the far northern darkness, the book says, at the very edge of the world where the cold sea has no bottom, there lives a fish. And this is no ordinary fish. This fish is named Kun, and it is thousands upon thousands of miles across. So large that no one could ever see the whole of it at once. You could sail for days along its flank and not reach the tail. It swims in that black northern deep, immense beyond imagining, a living thing the size of a country. And then, and here is the marvel, this fish transforms. The great Kun changes, its vast body reshapes itself, and it becomes a bird called Peng. And the Peng is as huge as the fish had been, its back broad as a mountain range. Its wings so wide that when it spreads them, they hang across the sky like banks of cloud, blotting out the light, casting shadow over whole horizons. Feel the scale of it, a wing like a weather front. A single bird so large that its passing overhead would darken the day like an eclipse. When the season turns and the great winds rise, this bird beats down upon the water. You can almost hear it. The thunder of those wings striking the sea, the spray flung up for miles, and it lifts. It climbs. Up and up, higher and higher, until the book gives us a number that the mind can barely hold. It rises 90,000 miles into the air. 90,000 miles. And there, in that impossible height, above the wind and the weather, above the clouds themselves, it turns and sets off on its long journey toward the great dark sea of the south. Now imagine you are lying on your back in a warm field on a summer night, and this bird passes over. You would not even understand what you were seeing. It would be too large. It would be like watching the sky itself decide to move. And that is the feeling the book wants, that sense of a scale so far beyond us that it loosens something in the chest, the way looking up at the real stars can loosen it, reminding you how small and how safe your own little worry is beneath something so wide. But here is where the Zhuangzi does its gentle, laughing thing. It does not leave us gazing up in solemn awe. No, it cuts at once to two very small creatures down on the ground, looking up at this titan of the air and giggling at it. There is a cicada, that little summer insect whose voice fills the hot afternoons, and there is a small dove, one of those little birds that flit from branch to branch in the garden. And the two of them watch the great Peng labouring up into the heights, climbing its 90,000 miles toward the south, and they nudge each other and laugh. "Look at him," they say. "Where does he think he's going? Why, when we decide to fly, we flit up toward the elm tree, and half the time we don't even reach the top branch. We flop back down to the ground, and that's quite far enough for us. What is all this 90,000-mile business? Where on earth does he imagine he needs to go?" And there is something so perfect and so human in that little scene. The small creatures simply cannot conceive of the great journey. It isn't that they're stupid, it's that their whole world is the space between the ground and the top of an elm tree. And from inside that world, the idea of climbing above the clouds and crossing to the far southern ocean is not just difficult, it's meaningless. It doesn't compute. They laugh not out of malice, but out of the sheer, cosy limitation of a small life that cannot see past its own little garden. And the book gathers this into one of its softest and truest sayings. Small understanding, it tells us, cannot reach large understanding. The little cannot comprehend the great. And then it gives us these two images, and I want you to hold them gently as you drift, because they are among the loveliest in all the book. The morning mushroom, it says, knows nothing of the passing of a whole month. Think of that. A little mushroom that springs up with the dew and is gone by afternoon. It lives its entire life inside a single day, and so the turning of the moon through a full month, the waxing and the waning, is a thing it will never know, could never know, a rhythm entirely outside its brief existence. And the summer cicada, that same little singer, knows nothing of the turning of the year. It hatches in the warm months, it sings its short song, and it is gone before the frost. So the great wheel of spring and summer and autumn and winter, the whole slow year, is forever beyond it. It lives and dies inside one warm season and never suspects there are others. There is no scolding in this. That is what I want you to notice. The Zhuangzi does not wag its finger at the mushroom or the cicada for their smallness. It simply shows them to us, tenderly, and lets us feel the truth, that every creature lives inside the size of its own understanding and cannot easily see beyond it. The little dove is not wrong to be a little dove. The great peng is not showing off. They are each simply being what they are, at their own scale, in their own world. And perhaps the book seems to whisper, the trick is not to force yourself to be the great bird if you are the small dove, nor to scold the dove for not being the bird, but to know your own nature and rest easy inside it. You can let that settle over you now. The great bird climbing in the vast quiet of the upper air, the little creatures laughing in the warm grass below. Neither one troubled. Both of them exactly, perfectly themselves, each at home in the only world they know. And somewhere between them, you, lying here in the dark, held by the same wide sky that holds them both. Now let us come back down, softly, out of the 90,000-mile heights, all the way back to the ground, back into a warm room, because I promised you a cook, and it is time to let him finish his work. In a great house, long ago, there lived a lord named Wenhui, and Cook Ding worked in his kitchens, and one day the lord came to watch him carve an ox. Now carving an ox sounds like heavy, bloody labour, all effort and strain. But watching Cook Ding was not like that at all. It was like watching a dance. Every place his hand touched, every lean of his shoulder, every step of his foot, every bend of his knee, all of it moved together in a rhythm, a flowing, unhurried rhythm. The book says the sounds of his blades slipping through the ox rang out in perfect time, as if he were performing to an ancient piece of music, some old sacred dance, some ceremonial song. There was no hacking, no sawing, no grunting effort, just this smooth, musical motion, the knife whispering through, the whole ox seeming to fall open of its own accord under his hands. Lord Wenhui watched, amazed, and when it was done he said, "Ah, wonderful! How can your skill possibly reach such heights?" And Cook Ding laid down his knife and answered him. And his answer is the heart of it, the very centre of what this book is trying to tell you, and it fits so beautifully against everything we have already heard tonight. The blade that never dulls, the water finding the low places, the small bird that flops back to the ground and is content, the great fish that becomes a bird without straining, simply transforming into what it is meant to be. "What I care about," said the cook, "is the way, the Tao, and that goes beyond mere skill. he told the Lord how it had been. "When I first began carving oxen," he said, "all I could see was the ox. The whole ox, standing there before me, a great solid mass, a wall of animal, and I did not know where to begin." Imagine facing that. A beginner sees only the enormous, intimidating whole, and everything looks like effort, like a problem to be forced open. But after 3 years, he went on, I no longer saw the whole ox. I began to see the parts, the natural divisions. And now, he said, after all these years, now he does not even use his eyes at all in the old way. He does not look and calculate and plan his cuts. Now, he said, he meets the ox with his spirit, with something deeper than seeing. His senses go still, and something in him that knows moves instead. And what does that inner knowing do? It follows. It follows the natural makeup of the ox, the way the muscles are laid, the seams where they join, the hollows between them, the great openings at the joints where the bones do not quite meet, and there is room, actual empty space. His blade goes there. It slips into those openings, glides along those seams, passes through the places that are already open. He guides it through the wide gaps and never, ever tries to cut through a bone, never fights his way through anything solid and hard. He does not force a single stroke, he simply finds where the ox is already willing to come apart, and lets it. A good cook, he said, changes his knife once a year, because he cuts. An ordinary cook changes his knife once a month because he hacks and chops and forces it against the hard places. And then he held up his own blade for the Lord to see. "This knife of mine," he said, "I have used for 19 years. It has carved thousands of oxen, and yet the edge is as sharp as if it had just come from the whetstone. 19 years. Thousands of oxen, and still brand new." And then he gave the reason, in an image so simple and so perfect that people have carried it in their hearts for 2,000 years. Between the joints of the ox, he said, there are spaces, gaps, hollows, room. And the edge of a well-honed blade has almost no thickness at all. It is thin beyond thinness, a line, a whisper of steel. And when you take something that has no thickness and guide it into a space that has plenty of room, why, there is all the room in the world. The blade wanders through the openings with space to spare on every side. It never touches what would wear it down. It never grinds against bone. And so it never dulls. It stays sharp forever. Not because it is a special knife, but because its owner never once forces it where it does not naturally go. He did add, honestly, that when he comes to a place that is tangled and difficult, a knot of muscle and bone all bound together, he does not pretend it is easy. He slows down. He watches carefully, holds his hand still, moves the blade with the smallest, gentlest motion, and then, all at once, the whole knot falls apart, thump, like a clod of earth crumbling to the ground. And he stands there holding his knife, and looks all around him, and lets himself feel quietly satisfied, and then he wipes the blade clean and puts it away. And Lord Wenhui, who had asked only about the carving of an ox, sat quiet for a moment. And then he said, and this is the line that turns the whole story, the little door that swings open at the end. He said, "Excellent. I have listened to the words of a cook, and from them I have learned how to nourish life." Sit with that for a breath. The Lord asked about cooking, and he was answered about how to live. Because the cook was never really only talking about the ox, was he? He was talking about you. He was talking about the way to move through a life, through all its muscle and bone, its tangles and hard places, its difficult days and its knotted problems. Not by hacking, not by forcing your way through every obstacle, straining and grinding yourself blunt against everything solid and unyielding until you are worn out and dull, but by learning, slowly, over the years to see where the openings are, to find the seams, to go where there is room, to meet each thing with your spirit rather than fighting it with all your might, and to slip through the gaps that are already there, so that even after 19 years, even after thousands of ordinary days, something in you stays keen and unworn, sharp as if fresh from the stone. That is how to nourish life. That is the cook's secret, and it is the great bird's secret, and it is the little dove's secret too, resting easy at the size it is. It is the secret this whole gentle book keeps telling you. Tale after tale after tale, stop forcing, follow the grain, go where there is room, and you become free. And there are so many more of these stories still waiting for us tonight. A tree so twisted and useless that no carpenter will touch it, and that is exactly why it has lived 1,000 years. A turtle dragging its tail happily through the warm mud. Two friends arguing on a bridge about whether anyone can ever truly know the happiness of a fish. A sage who sits so still and breathes so softly that he says he has lost himself. And, waiting at the very end, our butterfly drifting on the warm air in the dream that does not need to be answered. But those are further down the path, and there is no hurry to reach them. There is never any hurry in this book. For now, just stay here a little while with the cook and his blade that will not dull. Let your own breathing go as smooth and unforced as the knife slipping through the open spaces. Let the hard, knotted places of your day begin to fall softly apart, thump, like earth crumbling to the ground, needing no more of your effort tonight. There is room. There is so much room. And you have only to let yourself drift through it, easily, freely, following the grain of the quiet, going wherever the gentle current of sleep would gladly carry you. There is a tree Zhuangzi wants to show you now. Not the cook's ox, not the blade, not the great wheeling bird high in the southern sky. Something quieter than all of those. Something that has been standing in the same spot for so long that its roots have gone deeper than anyone has thought to measure. And its crown has spread out so wide that on a summer afternoon the shade it makes is almost cool enough to make you forget what month it is. Something that has been standing so long, in fact, that the men who knew what it looked like when it was young are themselves dust, and their children's children are dust, and the tree is still standing. Zhuangzi wants you to look at this tree, and he wants you to notice the first thing anyone usually says when they see it. Useless. That is always the first word. Now Huizi was Zhuangzi's closest friend, and Huizi was a logician, a man who loved nothing better than a tight argument, a clean proof, a statement that could not be refuted. Huizi was brilliant and restless and thorough, and he and Zhuangzi spent their lives sparring with each other in the most affectionate way, like two old cats who have been swatting each other's noses for so many years that they have forgotten whether they are playing or arguing. And it no longer matters. You will hear Huizi again before this night is over. He will be standing with Zhuangzi on a bridge, watching fish. He will be questioning him about a gourd. He will be the indispensable voice that makes Zhuangzi's own voice possible, the stone on which the blade is whetted. But here, near the beginning of all of this, Huizi is frustrated. He has a tree, you see. A very large tree, a tree of the ailanthus family, with a trunk so enormous that a man could not wrap his arms around it. and branches that twist and fork and redivide in ways that no carpenter's chalk line could ever follow, and bark so gnarled and knotted and figured with strange bulges that it would split any saw that tried to work it. It is not a handsome tree in the useful sense. It is not the kind of tree you can mill into planks, or shape into beams, or turn on a lathe into something sellable. Every carpenter who has ever looked at it has said the same word and walked on. Useless. The wood is too soft here and too hard there, too twisted in every direction to give you a single straight run of useful grain. You cannot make a boat from it, or a wheel, or a post, or a handle. You cannot do anything practical with it at all. And so Huizi is vexed, in the way that an orderly and logical mind is vexed by a thing that refuses to conform to any useful category. He brings this problem to Zhuangzi. The tree, he says, is so big that people stop and stare at it, and yet not one craftsman has ever bothered to look twice. It is massive and absolutely without use. And Zhuangzi's answer is so gentle, it almost does not sound like an answer at all. Why, he says, do you not plant it in the village of nothing whatever, in the field of broad and boundless? You could wander there and do nothing, or lie beneath it in the cool shade doing nothing, drifting in and out of sleep. No axe would ever fell it. Nothing would harm it. It cannot be used, and so nothing will use it up. And that, Zhuangzi says quietly, is not a flaw. That is precisely the thing. That is all. There is a field, in other words, where the only things growing are things that cannot be harvested, and in that field, in that imaginary and yet also somehow deeply real field, the useless tree does not suffer from its uselessness. It simply is. It shades. It breathes. It outlasts every useful thing around it by centuries. Let that settle a little, the way cool water settles after you have dropped a stone. But the book is not finished with the tree yet. Not even close. Later, in the 4th chapter of the book, in the section called In the World of Men, there is another carpenter and another tree, and this version of the story goes a little deeper into the dark, and then comes back out into the light from an unexpected direction. A master carpenter named Shai is travelling with his apprentice. They pass through a town, and at the local earth shrine there stands an oak tree. The kind of oak you would have to see to believe, because no description quite does the job. The branches shade an area large enough to shelter thousands of oxen. Smooth, glossy bark. The trunk wide enough to measure in spans of 10 hands. It draws a crowd just by existing. People come and look at it the way people come and look at the sea, because it is larger than them and older, and it makes them feel something they do not have a word for. The apprentice is amazed. He looks and then runs to catch up with carpenter Shai, who has already walked past the tree without slowing down. He asks his master, "Have you seen no other timber since we left home that you'd give a second glance to? And what about that oak? Surely a timber like that should delight a craftsman." The master shakes his head. "Don't even speak of it. That tree is worthless. Make a boat from it, it would sink. Make a coffin, it would rot too quickly. Make a tool from it, the tool would break. Make a door from it, the sap would seep out. Make a pillar, the worms would come. It is not a timber tree. It has nothing to offer. That, Carpenter Shai says, is why it has grown so old and so enormous. It got there by being good for nothing. There is nothing useful in it to take, and the apprentice thinks, well, that explains why the master walked past it. But it does not explain what the tree itself makes of all this. That night, Carpenter Shai dreams. The oak tree stands before him in the dream and speaks. And what the tree says is this: "What exactly are you comparing me to? Are you comparing me to your useful trees, your fruit trees, and your timber trees, your cherry trees and your pear trees, your mulberry and your catalpa? Those trees, the moment they produce their useful fruit, are stripped and abused. Their large branches are broken off, their small branches pulled down. Their utility makes their lives miserable. They cannot live out the years they were given. They are cut down before their time, and they invite their own early destruction precisely by being good for something. That is what usefulness brings. That is the gift of being wanted. I, the tree says, have spent a very long time learning to be useful for nothing. More than once I nearly died in the attempt. But now I have it right. My uselessness is not an accident. It is my great art, my protection, my long life." And then the tree says something else, something quieter, almost a murmur, almost the sound of wind moving through leaves. "You and I," it says, "we are both things of nature. Why should you presume to judge me as if you were something other than that? You, a man about to die, you, a useless man yourself in so many ways, what do you really know about what is useful and what is not?" Carpenter Shi wakes from the dream. He thinks about it for a long time, long enough to tell his apprentice the next morning, and the apprentice says, "If it wants to be useless, then why is it serving as a shrine tree? Why is it letting itself be venerated and worshipped? Isn't there a contradiction there?" And the answer the book gives is light and brief and perfect. Hush. The tree is just playing along. It is protecting itself in the only way available to it in that particular world. If it were not a shrine tree, it would have been cut down long ago. The usefulness of being a shrine object is a kind of disguised uselessness. It is honored but never touched, revered but never worked. It has found a gap in the world of utility, and it rests there, easy, the way a good cook's blade rests in the gap between the joints. Everyone knows the use of the useful, no one knows the use of the useless. That line is the still center of the story. You can sit with it as long as you like. It does not demand anything from you. It just holds still and breathes, like the tree. And if you find, as you lie here in the dark, that you have spent your day being tremendously useful, that you have been worked and shaped and harvested and asked to produce again and again until the asking felt like it would never stop, then perhaps the useless tree has something to say to you. Not as a lecture, only as a presence. Something that has chosen, very deliberately, to be good for nothing tonight. To let the axe pass. To let the tools go by. To offer nothing but a little quiet shade. Rest here for a moment in that shade. There is no hurry. But now Zhuangzi wants to complicate the picture. Because he is not a tidy teacher who hands you a lesson and lets you go. He is the kind of teacher who, the moment you think you have grasped the lesson, laughs very softly and adjusts it by half a degree. Just enough to make you realize the thing is slightly bigger and stranger and funnier than you thought. In the 20th chapter of the book, there is a story that seems at first to be repeating itself and is in fact doing something else entirely. Zhuangzi is walking in the mountains with some of his students. They pass through a stretch of forest where logging has been done, and there in the middle of the cleared area stands one enormous tree, alive and leafy, that the loggers have left completely untouched. Zhuangzi asks a nearby logger why this tree alone was spared. "Because it is useless," says the logger. "There is nothing you can do with the wood. It is good for nothing." And Zhuangzi turns to his students and smiles. This tree, he says, gets to live out its natural span because it is good for nothing. We have seen this before. The useless tree again, standing in its glory, lasting long by lasting unmolested. So far so familiar. But that evening, when they arrive at the house of an old friend, the friend is delighted to see them and wants to honour the visit. He calls to his servants to kill a goose for the meal, and the servant comes back to ask, "There are 2 geese. Master, one can honk, one cannot. Which shall I kill?" "Kill the one that cannot honk," says the host. And that night one of Zhuangzi's students comes to him privately, a little unsettled. Yesterday, the student says, the tree in the mountain lived by being useless. Today, the goose died by being useless. Which is it? Where do you actually stand on all this, master? And Zhuangzi laughs. He laughs the way the book itself laughs, not at the student exactly, but with a kind of genuine, unguarded delight at how good the question is, and how wonderfully the world keeps refusing to be simple. "I would stand halfway between usefulness and uselessness," he says. And then he stops, and thinks, and adds, "But even that is not quite right. Even that is still trying to find a fixed position, a stable place to stand, where you will always be safe, always protected, never on the wrong side of whatever cuts are being made. And there is no such place. A fixed position, even a clever one, even one halfway between 2 extremes, is still a position. And a position can always be found by whatever it is you are trying to avoid. The only one who is truly free," he says, "is the one who rides the natural truth of heaven and earth, who goes along with the changes of the 6 seasons, who drifts free from all things including the very categories of useful and useless." That is the wanderer of the first chapter. That is the great peng bird not caring whether the cicada thinks it makes any sense. That is the blade that does not choose a side, only follows the seams. And so the lesson of the useless tree is not, try to be useless. It is not a strategy at all. The moment you make it a strategy, you are the goose. The moment you set out to be no good for anything on purpose, in order to stay safe, you are already forcing, already trying, already reaching for something, and the easy naturalness is gone. The tree does not decide to be useless. It simply grows the way it grows, following its own grain, and the uselessness arrives on its own as a consequence, and the long life follows the uselessness, and none of this was planned. None of it was optimized. It happened the way the cook's blade never dulls, not through trying not to dull, but through moving in such exact accordance with what is real that the dulling never gets a chance to occur. Let your shoulders go. Let them drop a little more if they have any further to go. There is no correct position to be in right now. No useful thing being accomplished. Nothing to optimize. Only this, and the slight sound of your own breathing, and the dark, and the words coming and going like wind in the branches of a very old tree that no one has any use for. Now, Huizi is back. He has a gourd this time. Huizi tells Zhuangzi that the king of Wei gave him some seeds of a great gourd plant, and he grew them, and the gourd that came up was enormous, large enough to hold 5 piculs of water, which is a very considerable amount. And here is the problem. A gourd that big, if you tried to use it as a vessel, would be too heavy to lift. But if you tried to cut it in half and use the halves as scoops or ladles, the shallow dish shape would not hold anything either. Large and yet useless. Huge and without function. And so, he says, he smashed it. And Zhuangzi listens to all of this, with what you imagine is a very gentle expression, and then he says, "You are certainly clumsy at making use of big things. He tells Huizi about the people of Song, the region of Meng, Zhuangzi's own hometown as it happens, who had a family secret, a salve, a medicinal preparation for the skin that kept your hands from chapping in cold weather. The formula had been passed down through generations, and the family had always used it in the same way, working for people who washed raw silk in the winter, when the water was cold enough to crack your knuckles and leave your hands bleeding. The salve protected against that, kept the skin supple and soft through all those icy months of bleaching and rinsing. A modest and useful little trade. One winter, a stranger heard about this family and their salve and came to them and offered to buy the secret formula. He paid 100 pieces of gold for it, a very large sum, enough to change a family's circumstances considerably. They sold it without hesitation. The recipe was good, but 100 gold pieces was a fortune. The stranger took the formula to a different kingdom entirely. And that winter there was a naval battle, fought on the water in the freezing cold, and the commander who had the formula issued the salve to all his sailors before the engagement. The enemy sailors, without such protection, found their hands growing stiff and clumsy and painful in the cold water, their grip weakening, their movements slowing. The sailors with the salve stayed nimble and strong through the long hours of the battle. And because of this, because of warm, soft hands on cold oars, because of a formula for not chapping, the battle was won. And the stranger who had bought the recipe was awarded a title of nobility and granted a fief. The salve was identical. The formula did not change. The same preparation that had kept a family comfortable through winters of silk washing became the secret advantage in a naval engagement and bought a man a lordship. Same thing, Zhuangzi says. Different eyes. The family in Song had a fixed idea of what the salve was for. They could only see it one way, the way they had always seen it. They could not make the turn, could not stand a little sideways to what they knew and see what else it might become. They were not wrong exactly. The salve did what they thought it did. But they were like Huizi with the gourd, seeing a thing of a certain size and assuming that size dictated a certain and only function. Tie it to your waist as a float, Zhuangzi tells Huizi, and go drifting on the rivers and lakes. That is his answer to the great gourd. Don't make it a ladle. Don't make it a vessel for holding water and complain that it cannot hold water without tipping. Take the whole enormous hollow thing, strap it to your body and lie back in the current, face to the sky and drift. A thing that cannot do what a small thing does is not a failed small thing. It is something else entirely, with a use that only appears when you stop trying to force it into the shape of the small thing's function. The gourd is afloat, the tree's uselessness is its armour. The salve that protected hands also protected soldiers. The cook, who spent 19 years with a single blade, was not guarding a knife. He was discovering a way of moving through the world that left nothing behind it but ease. And you, here in the dark, in this hour between the day that is gone and the sleep that is coming, you are not a failed version of yourself at your most productive. You are exactly what is needed right now. You are a person resting, and resting is not the absence of usefulness. It is the other kind of usefulness, the one that the world of men cannot always see, the kind that replenishes everything the daylight hours drain. Close your eyes if they are not already closed. Breathe, let the gourd carry you. And now, downstream from all of this, downstream from the useless tree and the great hollow gourd and the salve that won a battle and the knife that never dulls, downstream from all of it, there is a river bank. and Zhuangzi is sitting on it, fishing. He has a bamboo pole. He has a line. He has, from all appearances, no ambitions whatsoever beyond the afternoon. This is the Pu River, wide and slow, and the water catches the light in that particular way still water does when there is not quite a wind, a soft, constant shifting of brightness. Not glittering exactly, more like breathing. Zhuangzi sits by it and watches it, and fishes, and is content. Two officials arrive from the court of the King of Chu. They have travelled a long way, and they are carrying a message that most men, in most eras, would have found enormously exciting. The King of Chu, they say, wishes to offer Zhuangzi the administration of all his territories, to put, in other words, the governance of a powerful and prosperous state into Zhuangzi's hands, to make him, in practical terms, one of the most powerful men in the known world. Zhuangzi does not turn around. He keeps his eyes on the water, on the line, on the slow drift of the current. And he says, after a moment, I have heard that Chu possesses a sacred tortoise that has been dead for 3,000 years. The king keeps it wrapped in cloth and stored in a fine box in his ancestral temple, where it is venerated and honoured with all appropriate ceremony. The officials agree that this is true. Zhuangzi says, "Tell me, if that tortoise could choose, would it rather be dead, and have its shell dried and preserved and honoured in the royal temple? Or would it rather be alive, out in the world, dragging its tail through the mud? Alive, they say. Alive in the mud. Unquestionably," Zhuangzi says, "then go. I too will drag my tail in the mud." The officials leave. Zhuangzi watches the river. Think about what has just been offered and refused. Not a modest position, not a comfortable sinecure. The administration of a kingdom. Power, influence, the ability to do things, to shape events, to have one's wishes carried out by thousands of subordinates. The kind of offer that most men, including many wise men, would have spent entire lifetimes trying to achieve and never managed. And Zhuangzi gives it exactly as much consideration as it takes to pose a question about a dead tortoise, and then returns his attention to the river. Because there is a kind of honour that is identical to death. There is a kind of prestige that embalms you. The tortoise in the temple is magnificent. It is reverenced. It is touched with care and spoken about in hushed tones. It is thoroughly and completely dead, and everything done to it after its death, the wrapping, the housing, the honouring, is done to the shell of a thing that was once alive and is alive no longer. Whereas the tortoise in the mud, the one dragging its tail through the soft riverbed, the one leaving a slow trail behind it in the silt, the one that nobody cares about and nobody venerates, that tortoise is alive. Its blood moves. The mud is cold, and the sun is warm, and its legs work, and it knows where the water is deeper and where it shallows. It is alive in the way that being alive actually feels. Zhuangzi wants to drag his tail in the mud. He wants the fishing pole, and the afternoon, and the river, the weight of the line, the long, slow patience of watching water. Not because these things are humble, exactly, or because he is making a philosophical point about the virtues of simplicity. More because all of that, the court, the officials, the king's favour, the cloth-wrapped honour, the reverential treatment, would be a kind of taxidermy. It would make him into something to be housed and consulted and kept, and he would stop being the thing he actually is. There is a later account in the book, in the 17th chapter, which also contains the joy of fishes. And we are coming to that, where a very similar thing happens, but the questioner is different. The king of Wei sends word asking Zhuangzi to come to court. And someone else in that exchange asks Zhuangzi, is it not an honor to be sought after by kings? And Zhuangzi tells a story about a sacrificial ox. The ox is washed and brushed and dressed in beautiful embroidered cloth, and fed the best grain for years in anticipation of the great ceremony. And when that moment comes, when the ox, clean and magnificent and well fed and honored, is led to the altar, don't you think it would rather have been a simple pig, forgotten in the straw, living out its plain and ordinary life? The honor is the trap. The prestige is the preparation for the altar. You cannot hold on to Zhuangzi. He will not be kept. He slides through every net that authority or admiration or obligation tries to lower into the water, and he surfaces somewhere else, downstream, just around the bend, singing, with mud on his tail, free. And here is what is interesting about this freedom. It does not look like what we usually mean by freedom. It does not look like power, or movement, or the ability to go anywhere and do anything. It looks like a man sitting by a river, fishing. It looks like stillness. It looks like a useless tree in the afternoon shade. It looks like a cook who has had the same knife for 19 years and sees no reason to change. From the outside, it is nearly invisible. The officials from Chu saw a man fishing by the Pu River, and they left with a polite refusal, and they probably reported back to their king that Zhuangzi was an eccentric who preferred the riverbank to the palace. And they were not wrong, but they missed what the riverbank was and what it meant to be on it. The river was not a consolation prize. The river was the kingdom, and the fishing was the administration of it, and Zhuangzi was already exactly as powerful as he wanted to be, in the only territory that mattered to him, which was the territory of his own unhurried afternoon. This is a kind of freedom that looks like abdication, but is actually the opposite. Most of what we think of as power, the ability to make others do things, to acquire and distribute resources, to be consulted and referred to and honored, requires enormous effort to obtain, enormous vigilance to maintain, and enormous sacrifice of the specific texture of the present moment. You cannot sit by a river and watch the light change on the water if you are also managing a state. The light changing on the water requires your full and undivided presence. And presence of that quality does not divide. Zhuangzi does not divide. He holds, very lightly, the one thing he has, which is this moment, this river, this afternoon, this line in the water. And he holds it so lightly that it does not feel like holding at all. He is just there. The rod and the line and the current and the willingness to wait for as long as it takes, or until he falls gently asleep in the sun, which is also fine. Now let the river be whatever river is near you right now in the dark. Let the sound of the water come in from wherever sounds are coming from in your night, the settling of the house, the distant murmur of something mechanical and steady, the soft white field of silence if the silence is complete. Let it all be river. Let it all be that afternoon light shifting on the slow water, the line drifting, no particular need for anything to happen. You are not the tortoise in the temple. You are not wrapped and honored and preserved. You are here, warm, breathing, your tail moving softly through the dark. Alive in the specific and unremarkable way that alive actually feels from the inside, which is to say, this. Just this. The warmth of the blanket or the sheet, the weight of your own limbs, the slight give of the surface beneath you. Drag your tail in the mud. It is the better appointment. The Pu River does not require anything of you. It does not need to be administered. It carries itself downstream perfectly well without instruction or management, and has been doing so for longer than anyone has any record of, and will continue after everyone who has ever watched it has been turned back into the elements they were made of. The river is the Tao, Zhuangzi might say if pressed, though he would probably say something funnier than that, and then go back to fishing. But the sacred tortoise stays in mind. 3,000 years, wrapped in cloth, every ceremony observed, every honour paid, and not one more moment of cool mud, or green water, or the particular sensation of moving slowly through a world that is wider than a wooden box. 3,000 years is a very long time to be kept. Let yourself not be kept tonight. Let yourself be entirely outside the box, outside the cloth, outside the honoured and the preserved. Let yourself be the soft and ordinary and unimportant living thing lying in its natural place, unremarked upon, dragging its tail. The river goes on. The afternoon does not end in the Zhuangzi's telling of it. There is no closing ceremony at the riverbank, no formal conclusion. Zhuangzi simply stays. The officials leave. The water moves. The line drifts. And from that stillness, from that absolute refusal to be made into a monument, everything else in the book grows. All the other stories are downstream from this refusal. The cook was never trying to be the most famous cook in the world. He was trying to follow the grain of the ox, and his skill grew out of that following as a natural consequence. The way a tree grows tall, not by trying to be tall, but by taking in water and light. The useless tree was not performing uselessness. It was growing the way it grew, and the uselessness arrived on its own, and the long life arrived with it. And Zhuangzi on the riverbank was not performing contentment. He was simply content, in the immediate and unreflective way that content actually happens. When nothing is being forced, and nothing is being added to the moment that the moment does not already contain. This is the thread that runs through all of these stories, the thin, strong thread you can only feel if you hold it very lightly and let it tell you which way it runs. Stop forcing. Follow the grain. Go where there is room, and let the long life and the keen blade and the quiet afternoon and the free drifting on the water come to you by themselves, without your having to seek any of them. There are still more stories waiting further along the path tonight. The darkness of Chapter 2 is ahead, its piping winds and its shadow that depends on something that depends on something else. And at the heart of all of that, the butterfly, waiting as it has always been waiting, in the space between one thought and the next, between one breath and the following one. But we are not there yet. We are still here, by the river, in the late afternoon, where Zhuangzi is sitting. The water catches what light there is, and does something beautiful with it that cannot be held, and cannot be stored, and cannot be embalmed, and cannot be honoured in any temple. It just keeps happening, right now, quietly, whether anyone is watching or not. And maybe that is the deepest thing the useless tree and the hollow gourd and the tortoise in the mud are all trying to say. Not that usefulness is wrong, or that effort is foolish, or that the world of men and their hierarchies and their honours is simply mistaken, but that there is another kind of value, a kind that does not appear on any accounting ledger, that cannot be purchased or awarded or ceremonially installed. The value of the tree that shades, the value of the gourd that carries you lightly on the water, the value of the afternoon by the river, undivided, unrecorded, belonging to no one but this moment in its vanishing. You have that. Right now. Here in the dark, without anything to show for it, without producing anything, without being useful to anyone. You have the unremarkable living miracle of your own breathing, and the warmth of wherever you are lying, and the darkness, and the silence, and the words coming and going like clouds moving across a sky that is too wide to hold any of them for long. The tortoise is in the mud. The tree stands, enormous and unmolested, in its own shade. The great hollow gourd bobs gently on the river surface, and somewhere lashed to it, going wherever the current goes, is someone who let go of the need to know exactly where that is. And the knife is still sharp. After all of this, after everything that has been said and told, and let quietly fall, the knife in the cook's hand is still sharp. Rest here in that. There is a man sitting in a room, leaning on an armrest. His name is Ziki, and he lives on the south wall, and the second chapter of the Zhuangzi opens on him in almost perfect silence. Not the silence of a room where nothing is happening. The silence of a room where something has just finished happening inside someone, something no one else can see. His student Yancheng Ziyo stands watching him. The student sees his teacher leaning there, breathing, very slowly, and notices that the teacher's eyes are not quite focused on anything, and that he is exhaling in a way that sounds like a man letting something go that he had been carrying for a long time. Not dropping it in distress, just setting it down, gently, because he finally can. Then Yancheng Ziyo asks him what has happened, and Ziki says, quietly, "This morning I lost myself." Just that. 3 words in the original. This morning I lost myself. The student hears this and does not know how to respond, because losing yourself sounds like a problem, like something that should be fixed, like the kind of thing you go looking for. And yet his teacher is sitting there like a man who has just come home after a very long journey and found the door already unlocked and a fire already burning, and realized he never had to have made the trip at all. He is not distressed. He is the least distressed person in the room. The losing seems to be the whole point. And then Ziki asks his student a question. 3 questions, actually, though they spiral into each other like a shell. Have you heard the piping of men, he asks, but not the piping of earth? The piping of earth, but not the piping of heaven? Let those 3 sit for a moment without rushing past them. The piping of men is the simplest. You know that one. It is every instrument made by hands, flute and drum and the voice singing. All the music that requires someone to decide to make it, to pick it up, to blow. It has a player behind it, a will, an intention. The piping of men is what we usually mean when we say sound. Someone is doing it. The piping of earth is different. Ziki describes it now, and the description is so physical, so full of texture, that it would be easy to miss how strange it is. When the great wind rises, he says, not a storm, not a catastrophe, just the big wind that gathers somewhere out beyond the hills, it breathes out through 10,000 different hollows at once. Through the hollows in old trees that are shaped like nostrils, through gaps between rocks that are shaped like mouths, through concave places in cliff faces that are shaped like ears, like cups, like mortars, like shallow pools, and each hollow breathes in a different voice. This is not a metaphor, or rather, it is a metaphor so close to physical fact that the line stops mattering. If you have ever stood in a forest when a wind comes up and heard 10 different notes rising out of different directions, one low and round, one sharp and whistling, one almost like a question, that is what Ziki means. The earth is an instrument with 10,000 mouthpieces, and the same wind plays all of them at once, each one singing what its own shape allows. And so there is a roaring from some hollows, and a whistling from others, and a sound like sobbing from the narrow ones, and something close to hooting from the round and deep ones, and from the smallest, most intricate hollows. There is something almost like the sound of water over stones, the very high, fine note that barely reaches your ear before it is gone. All of this happening at once, in 10,000 directions, a vast, unplanned orchestra in which no one has arranged anything, and yet it is perfectly full. And then, and this is the part that does something to you, if you let it, when the wind dies down. Every last hollow falls silent, one by one, or all at once, or in some order that no one could describe, because there is no one positioned to hear all of it simultaneously. They just stop. The notes fade. The forest goes quiet. The cliffs stop humming. The gaps between stones hold still. And Ziki lets that sit for a moment before he asks the real question. Who was it that was blowing? Not who was playing the instruments, not who designed the hollows, just who was blowing the air through them. Where did the wind come from, and where did it go, and who or what decided to send it, or stop it? He does not answer this. The chapter does not answer this. The Zhuangzi as a whole, if you read all 33 chapters in the gentle translations that have come down from Watson and from Graham and from Zipperin, does not answer this. The question is the thing. The not knowing is not a gap to fill, but a space to rest in, like a hollow that has gone quiet when the wind dies down. Something was moving through everything, and now it has stopped, or paused, and all you know is that you were not it, and neither was anything else you can name, and that is all right. That is more than all right. It is enough to just listen to the forest settling, and not need to know. You are breathing right now the way the tree hollows breathe when the wind is very faint, in, out, without choosing to, without anyone deciding. Whatever it is that moves the wind, something very like it is moving your chest, and has been moving it every night of your life without your asking, and will keep moving it while you sleep. Ziki of the South Wall lost himself this morning, and he sat there leaning on his armrest, looking like a man at peace with the entire situation. Maybe losing yourself is not a disaster. Maybe it is what happens when you stop working so hard to be the person doing the breathing and let yourself be the hollow the wind moves through instead. The chapter keeps moving, unhurried, just before the butterfly dream, which is coming. Do not worry, it is coming. The night has not forgotten it. There is a small passage that the commentators often skip over because it seems puzzling, a brief exchange that sounds almost like a riddle someone tells when they are almost asleep themselves and have let their guard down against strangeness. It is the conversation of the shadow and the penumbra. The penumbra is the faint half-shadow, the paler fringe at the edge of a shadow. The zone where darkness softens into light but has not quite become it. Think of the shadow of your hand on a sunlit wall, and then look at the very edge of that shadow, where the hard line softens and blurs into something neither dark nor light. That soft fringe, that in-between, is the penumbra. And in this passage the penumbra asks the shadow a question. A moment ago you were moving, it says. Now you are still. Before you were sitting, now you are standing. Why? Why do you move when you move and stop when you stop? Why do you have no will of your own in this? The shadow answers, and the answer is the strange thing. I depend, says the shadow, on what I depend on, and what I depend on itself depends on something else. I am like the scales of a snake The snake uses them to move, and I could not say from the outside whether it decides to use them or they simply act. I am like the wings of a cicada. There is something prior to me and something prior to that, and I cannot stand back far enough to see where it starts or what is doing the deciding. How can I know why I do what I do? How can I know why I don't? This is not despair. That is the important thing about this exchange and the reason it belongs in a chapter about rest rather than a chapter about anxiety. The shadow is not distressed by its dependence. It is not searching frantically for the original thing that causes it to move. It is simply acknowledging, quietly, with something almost like relief, that there is more behind everything than it can see, and that this has always been true, and that it goes on moving and stopping according to rhythms it did not choose and cannot fully trace. And this is simply how it is. You are like the shadow, not as a diminishment, as a description. What you are depends on what you depend on, and that depends on something else, and somewhere back along that chain is something you will never locate, because the chain does not have a visible beginning. You move through your days according to causes that extend far behind you in time and far around you in space, and the very thoughts you think right now in this quiet arrived through paths you did not lay and do not entirely own. And this turns out not to be frightening. It turns out to be spacious. Because if the self is already this porous, already this continuous with everything around it, then the border between you and the dark and the quiet and the drifting and the dissolving that comes with sleep is not so sharp as you thought. The penumbra asks the shadow why it moves without a will of its own, and the shadow's answer is, so does everything, all the way down, and we are all home in that. Together. And then comes the butterfly. It is the end of chapter 2, and there is nothing after it in that chapter. The chapter simply ends on this image, the way certain pieces of music end on a note that does not quite resolve, that hangs in the air after the musicians have put down their instruments, that lives in the room for a moment after it is over, not demanding anything. Zhuang Zhou once dreamed he was a butterfly. Just that, to begin with. He was asleep, the way you are nearly asleep right now, and in that sleep something happened that felt entirely real and entirely complete in itself. He was a butterfly, fluttering, happy, doing as he pleased. The text says this twice almost, happy and doing as it pleased. The happiness is inseparable from the freedom of movement. The butterfly goes where the butterfly goes, and the butterfly is simply what it is, lightly and without argument. It has no memory of having ever been Zhuang Zhou. It does not carry Zhou with it into the dream. It does not keep stopping to check whether it is really a butterfly or wonder how long the dream will last. It is just the butterfly, complete, doing as it pleases. And then Zhuang Zhou woke up. There he unmistakably was. Zhou again. Back in the life, back in the body, back in the continuity that had been running all along while the butterfly was fluttering. There were the hands. There was the room. There was the familiar weight of being a particular person in a particular place with a particular past. But something had shifted. Something small or enormous, it is hard to tell, because the shift is not distressing, just noticing. He did not know, now that he was awake, whether he was Zhou who had dreamed he was a butterfly, or whether he was, and here the text lets the sentence breathe rather than rushing past, a butterfly now dreaming he is Zhou. Between Zhou and a butterfly, the text says, there must necessarily be a barrier, a distinction, some line that separates one from the other. There must be. And yet the dream had been as real as this waking, and the waking arrives after the dream the way the waking always does, with its ordinary authority, its obvious solidity, and yet the obvious solidity was not there during the dream. And the dream had its own obvious solidity while it was happening, and now here is Zhou, awake, entirely Zhou, unable to prove from the inside which side of what barrier he is on. He names this, and this is the exact phrase the text uses, the one that scholars of the Zhuangzi have been sitting with for over 2,000 years. He names this Wu Hua, the transformation of things, not life is an illusion, not nothing is real, not you are dreaming right now and you should be anxious about it. The text does not say those things and does not mean them, and a good translation does not push them in that direction. Wu Hua, the transformation of things, is softer than any of those. It is simply the acknowledgement that things change into other things, and the changing is real. And the thing that does the changing is real, and yet what the thing is at any given moment, butterfly or zhou, hollow or wind, shadow or penumbra, might be less fixed than you assumed when you were not paying attention. The butterfly and the man are both real. The boundary between them is also real. And yet that boundary is not where you thought it was, is not doing the work you expected it to do, is not the load-bearing wall of your identity that it seemed before you fell asleep and became a butterfly who remembered nothing of being anyone else. And he never tells you the answer. Zhuang Zhou, the man, or the book written in his name, or the followers who elaborated it, none of them tell you which is the dream. The question is posed, and then the chapter ends. The wind stops. The hollows go quiet. The butterfly folds its wings, or opens them, or disappears in the way things disappear when someone wakes up, and there is nothing after that in the chapter to explain or resolve or assure you. That is the gift, if you can receive it as a gift. Most philosophy, when it offers you a puzzle about the nature of reality, is secretly hoping you will find the puzzle alarming and work very hard to resolve it. What is real? This is supposed to make you anxious. Zhuang Zhou poses the same question and somehow makes it feel like the softest thing in the world. As if not knowing, genuinely not knowing, whether you are the man who dreamed or the butterfly dreaming is not a problem to solve, but a door left open to let the night air in. As if the transformation of things, Wu Hua, the constant gentle becoming and unbecoming that runs through everything, is not a threat to who you are, but a description of what you have always already been. Moving and changing and dreaming your way through life exactly as butterflies do, exactly as leaves do, exactly as the sound of wind through hollows does. You are already doing Wu Hua. Right now, your body is changing, your breathing is changing. The state you call awake is becoming the state you call asleep by degrees, so gradual that there is no single moment you can point to as the crossing. You are somewhere in the middle of a transformation, and the transformation is fine, and you do not need to know which side you are on. The butterfly dream is not a riddle. It is a permission slip. Let the wings open or close or dissolve. Let Zhou be whatever he is or isn't, here or elsewhere, certain or uncertain. The transformation of things is underway, and you are inside it, and that is exactly where you should be. Sometime after the butterfly dream, and the book gives no timestamp, no transition marker, just a drift from one day on the water to another, Zhuangzi is standing on a bridge. He is with Huizi. They are old friends, these two, and the friendship is one of the more quietly moving things about the Zhuangzi, because Huizi is a logician, a man who loves argument and precision and the careful architecture of thought, and Zhuangzi is whatever Zhuangzi is, and they have been disagreeing warmly and shamelessly with each other for what seems like decades. Through gourds and trees and butterflies and turtles and all the rest of it, they are not enemies. They are something better and stranger than that. They are the kind of friends who argue because they cannot stop thinking alongside each other. The bridge is over the Hao River. The Hao sounds close to the way an English speaker might say it, a soft aspirated H. The river is not dramatically described. It is just a river under a bridge, and two friends leaning on the railing in the way people lean when the day is unhurried and there is nothing immediately requiring attention. And below them, in the shallows, there are fish. Small ones, moving quickly, darting and circling in the clear water the way fish do when nothing is threatening them and the current is mild and the light is good. And Zhuangzi watches them for a moment and says, "See how the minnows dart and play. That is the joy of fishes." He says it simply, the way you might point out to someone standing beside you that the clouds are building up to the west. An observation. A pleasure. The fish are joyful. Here they are, being joyful, right here below us. And Huizi, because he is Huizi, says, "You are not a fish. How do you know the joy of fishes?" This is not cruelty or pedantry from Huizi. This is Huizi being exactly who he is, which is someone who genuinely cares about the precision of claims and cannot let a loose one pass without at least pointing at it. He is not mocking Zhuangzi. He is engaging with him as a serious thinker. You cannot know what the fish feel, he is saying, because you are not the fish. The fish's inner life is not available to you. You can see the movement, the darting, the circling, but you cannot see from the inside whether there is joy or simply the mechanical repetition of fins doing what fins do. The claim outruns what you can know. And Zhuangzi answers, "You are not me." So how do you know I don't know? This is a reflex, a quick return of the argument, and Huizi sees it and meets it directly. "I am not you," he says, "so I cannot know you. That is true, and I grant it. And you are not a fish, so you cannot know the fish. The logic holds in both directions. The structure is the same. The fish is to you as you are to me, and in both cases the inner life is not available from the outside." And this is where Zhuangzi does the thing that makes this exchange worth sitting with. He says, "Let us go back to your first question. You asked me how I know. And in that question, in the very act of asking it, you already granted that I know. You did not ask whether I know, you asked how. So you had already admitted the knowing. All that was in question was its source. And where does it come from? I know it here," he says, "standing above the how." There is something playing under this exchange that the original Chinese carries in a way that translations can only gesture toward. The word that Huizi used, how, is the same word, or a very close neighbour to the word, that means where from, whence, from what place. So when Zhuangzi says, "I know it here," standing above the how, he is answering the question in its second meaning rather than its first. Not explaining the mechanism, not proving the epistemology, not constructing a logical defense of his right to know fish joy. Just pointing. Down, here, the bridge, the river, the light on the water, the minnows moving through it all. That is where the knowing comes from. This is not an evasion. Do not let anyone tell you it is an evasion. It is the most serious possible answer to that kind of question, and it is also the gentlest and the most human. There are things you know from standing in a particular place at a particular time with the light falling a particular way. things that arrive not through argument, but through attention, and you cannot fully transfer them into the architecture of a proof without losing the most important part of them. The proof is the husk. The knowing at the how is the fruit. You have your own How River moments. Everyone does. Moments where you knew something with the whole of yourself and could not have said why or how, but the knowing was complete. The warmth of a particular afternoon. The strange certainty that someone you love was fine before you had any news of them. The recognition of a piece of music as yours before you knew its name. These are not lesser forms of knowing. They are what knowing feels like when it has not been translated into argument yet, and some of it survives the translation and some of it doesn't, and the part that doesn't is real. I know it here, standing above the how. Huizi has no answer for this. Or the text does not give him one. The bridge exchange ends there, the way so many things in the Zhuangzi end, not with a conclusion, but with a word that lands and stays, hovering above the water like the image of the minnows playing in the shallows, which were joyful, which are joyful, which will go on being joyful, or not long after the two old friends have walked away. And you are left there on the bridge for a moment after they have gone. The river is still there, the minnows are still moving. The light has changed a little, the way light does. What did you just witness? An argument, yes, a philosophical demonstration, yes, but also just two people on a bridge in the middle of an afternoon, disagreeing about fishes. The Zhuangzi keeps doing this, keeps folding the enormous into the ordinary until you cannot tell them apart, until the question about the limits of knowledge and the image of small fish in a clear river are the same image, and the answer to the unanswerable is a gesture toward the ground you are standing on. There is a duke, and he is in his hall, reading, below him, in the same courtyard. A wheelwright is working. The wheelwright's name is Bian, and he is old, and he is very good at his work, and he has been cutting wheels so long that the distinction between the wheel he is making and the skill in his hands has become difficult to locate. His hands know before he does. His hands have always known. The Duke is reading what the book describes as the words of the sages, the great teachers, the wise and venerable figures from the past whose words were preserved carefully in texts that could be carried and consulted and passed from one generation to the next. He is reading these words in the way a person reads something important, slowly and with respect. He is Duke Huan of Qi, and he is powerful, and he takes the wisdom of the sages seriously. Old Bian, the wheelwright, sets down his tools, he wipes his hands. He comes to the foot of the hall steps, and he calls up, not disrespectfully but directly, and asks what the Duke is reading. The words of the sages, says the Duke. Are those sages alive? Asks Bian. They are dead. Then what you are reading, says Bian, is the dregs of the ancients. The Duke is a man with the authority to have people killed for less than this. He is angered, understandably. He tells the wheelwright that if he cannot explain himself with a satisfying argument, he will die for the insolence. This is how things work in the courts of the Warring States period. There are stakes, sometimes very physical ones, attached to these philosophical exchanges. The Zhuangzi understands this and does not flinch from it. The wheelwright says, explain himself he will. When I work, says Bian, there is a feel to it that cannot be taught and cannot be put into words. If I go too gently, the wheel comes out loose and the spoke does not hold. If I go too hard, the joint is stiff and the wheel will not turn true. The right touch, the touch that makes a wheel that will roll for years and hold its shape through mud and rain and distance, That touch exists somewhere between too little and too much, and it answers to my hands, and it answers to my mind. But I cannot fix it in language. I cannot instruct my son in it. I cannot write it down and have someone else read it, and therefore know how to feel it. My son is 70 years old, and he is still cutting wheels himself, learning the feel of it through his own hands, because I could not give it to him any other way. So when the sages knew something, he says, the knowing that mattered was exactly this kind of knowing, the kind held in the hand, in the breath, in the body's encounter with the specific grain and weight and resistance of the world. That kind cannot be preserved in writing. What went into the book was what could go into the book, which is not nothing, but is also not the thing itself. It is the container that held the wine after the wine is gone. It is the shape left in the pillow after the sleeper has risen. It is, to use his word, the word the text actually uses, the dregs. What settles to the bottom when the living knowing has poured itself out and been used up in a life. The Duke, to his credit, is not angry after hearing this, or the text does not record his anger, which might mean it dissipated, or might mean the exchange ended in some other way, or might mean that the wheelwright's argument was simply too clear to contest. Whatever the Duke felt in that moment, the exchange is preserved, and it has been read for more than 2,000 years, and it has not stopped being true in all that time. There is a kind of knowing that cannot leave the body it lives in. This is not a romantic claim about the mysterious untranslatability of wisdom. It is a practical description of how skill actually works. Ask anyone who has ever learned an instrument, or learned to cook something properly, or learned to move through water or over ice, or up a rock face. There is a point in that learning where the knowledge stops being in your head and starts being in your hands and your weight and your timing. And after that point, the knowledge is not portable in the old way. You cannot lend it. You cannot hand it on directly. The other person has to go through their own version of the learning. The same slow accumulation of attempts and corrections, and almost rights and better that's, until one day the knowledge settles into their body too, and they have it the way you have it, which is the only way there is. The sages, the great teachers of the past, Laozi and the others, the figures whose words are still read and cited and debated, they had this kind of knowing. They tried to gesture toward it with words, and the gestures are real, and they point at something real, and reading them is not useless. But the thing they were pointing at died with them, not because they failed, because it was the kind of thing that cannot do otherwise. This is, quietly, one of the most important things the Zhuangzi says, and it is easy to miss because it is delivered by a man with sawdust on his hands talking to a duke in a courtyard. The great texts of the tradition, including, by implication, the Zhuangzi itself, are at best the best possible gestures towards something that cannot be gesturally captured. The book knows it is the dregs. The book tells you it is the dregs. It is still worth reading, worth sitting with in the dark, worth letting move through you like wind through the hollows of trees. But it is not the thing. The thing is what happens in you when the words go quiet. The wheelwright picks up his tools again. The Duke reads on. Somewhere in the courtyard the wheel that Bian was cutting will be finished by the end of the day, and it will roll true. And no one who uses it will know anything about how it was made, except that it was made by someone who had the right touch. That touch is not in any book, not even this one. But you are already very close to it. Already your breathing is slower than it was when the night began. Already the boundary between the words arriving and the quiet that surrounds them is less sharp than it seemed. Already you are becoming, very gradually, something slightly different from what you were. The way the fish in the shallows of the Hao are always slightly different from moment to moment. Different temperature, different current, different quality of light from above. And yet, still the fish, still moving, still, in whatever way fishes are joyful. Joyful. The chapter on equality of things, Chi Wu Lun, the second of the 7 inner chapters, had said from the beginning that the 10,000 things are in some sense equal, not the same, not interchangeable. Equal, the minnow and the pengbird, the summer cicada and the vast northern darkness, Zhou and the butterfly, the sage's living knowledge and the trace of it left in a text. Equal in this sense, each is what it is, entirely, without apology, without measuring itself against the others. And each partakes of the same transformation of things, the same wuhua, the same turning of something into something else that runs through all of it, the way the great clod breathes through every hollow at once. Ziki lost himself this morning. He leaned on his armrest and let his breath go and stopped being the one doing the breathing. The shadow stopped trying to explain its own movement. Zhuang Zhou woke from the butterfly and named the not-knowing gently, without alarm. The fish went on darting in the shallow water of the Hao, and old Bian, the wheelwright, cut his last wheel of the day and found the feel of it in his hands, the way he always did, the way no book could tell you, the way he would take with him when he was done. All of this is the second chapter, the chapter on making things equal, and you do not need to hold any of it as argument or doctrine or checklist. You can let it do what the wind through the hollows does. It comes through, it makes its various sounds, and then it gentles down, and you are left in the quiet that follows, which is a different kind of quiet than the one before the wind came, because something has moved through it now, and everything is slightly more itself for having been moved through. The piping of heaven, says Ziki. Not the piping of men, not even the piping of earth. The piping that uses both of those, and more, and cannot be identified with any one sound or any one hollow, because it is the capacity for sounding itself, the fact that there are hollows and that something moves through them, which is prior to any particular sound that results. You are one of the hollows. Right now, at this hour, in this quiet, something is moving through you, has always been moving through you, will continue to move through you in ways you will not be awake enough to notice in a few minutes, when the boundary between watching and becoming and dissolving is so soft it can barely be said to be there. The transformation of things is not something that happens to you later. It is happening now, has been since before you knew enough to call it anything. There is a place in the text called El Liang, where the water falls hundreds of feet and the white spray rises and the current churns so hard that no fish can hold there, no turtle either, nothing that swims for its life and knows it. The water at the base of the falls is not water in any ordinary sense, it is force in liquid form. It is the kind of thing a person looks at from the bank and knows, without being told, that they would not survive it. Confucius stands at the bank at El Liang. He is watching the falls, which is the kind of thing Confucius does in the Zhuangzi. He shows up at edges, at thresholds, wherever something unusual is happening, and he watches with the seriousness of a man who believes that watching carefully is already a form of wisdom. He sees an old man tumble into the water, into that churning, white, impossible water. He calls to his students, "Go, quickly, pull him out," because what else do you do when you watch a man fall into a place where no living thing can stay? And then the students run along the bank, and the water does what the water does, and a little way downstream the old man climbs out. Unhurried, he shakes the water from his hair, perhaps. He strolls along the bank, and from somewhere in him a sound comes, low and unhurried, and it is singing. He is singing. He has come through the falls of El Liang, and he is strolling and singing on the other side. Confucius catches up with him, because Confucius always catches up. He cannot help it. He asks, "Do you have some special way, some technique, some art for moving through water that the rest of us have not been taught?" And the old man says, "No, no technique." He says it simply, the way a person says something that has stopped being remarkable to them. He says, "I go in with the swirl and I come out with the swell. I follow the way of the water. I do not impose my own will on it." That is everything. That is the whole answer. Go in with the swirl. Come out with the swell. Do not impose yourself on the water. Do not tell it what shape you need it to be. Do not try to hold a path against the current. Do not fight what is already moving. Follow the way of the water, and the water, which would destroy you if you fought it, becomes the very thing that carries you through. The old man was not doing nothing. Following is not the same as nothing. But what he was doing was so closely fitted to what the water was doing that there was no gap between them, no friction, no edge for the current to catch and spin and drown. He had made himself in some important way continuous with the water, and the water, which knew nothing of him, carried him all the same. This is what the cook knew, what the blade knew, what Lord Wenhui meant when he said that from a cook's words he had learned to nourish life. Not a lesson about cooking, not even, really, a lesson about living, more like a felt sense of a way of moving through the world that does not push against the grain of things. The world has a grain. The ox has seams and hollows and spaces where there is room. The water at El Liang has a swirl and a swell, a pattern of force with its own shape. The grain of the wood already contains the bell stand. All of this is already there. The question is only whether you arrive at it forcing or whether you arrive at it following. There is a woodcarver in the 19th chapter whose name is Ching, and what he makes is bell stands. The carved wooden frames from which the great bronze bells are hung in ceremonies. When Ching finishes a bell stand, everyone who sees it believes it must have been made by spirits. It has that quality of the impossible about it. The fit, the proportion, something in the grain of the wood and the shape of the stand that makes it seem less carved than grown, less made than discovered. The Marquis of Lu asks him, "What is your secret art?" And Ching says, "I am only a workman. I have no secret art. But there is something I do before I begin. When I am going to make a bell stand," he says, "I dare not let my vital energy, my qi, be dissipated. So I fast to still my heart. After 3 days of fasting, I no longer think about congratulations or rewards. After 5 days, I no longer think about praise or blame, skill or clumsiness. After 7 days, I have so forgotten myself that I no longer think about my 4 limbs, my body. By that time there is no court for me, no ruler, no distractions. My skill is concentrated, and outside distractions have fallen away. Then I go into the forest. I look at the nature of each tree. I look until I find the one in which I can already see the completed bell stand. Then, and only then, I put my hand to it. If I cannot see the stand in the tree, I leave the tree and walk on. What happens," he says, "is that I bring heaven and meet heaven. That is why the thing I make seems to have been done by spirits, because both the wood and I came from the same source." and I did nothing but let that source work through my hands. 7 days of fasting to empty out the noise, 7 days to let the congratulations and the blame and the idea of his own body all fall quiet. And what is left at the end of those 7 days is not nothing, it is something more like the original hymn, the part that can see what the wood already is, the part that can bring its own heaven and meet the heaven already present in the grain. He did not impose the bell-stand on the wood, he found the bell-stand that was already there. And then there is a passage from the same chapter, quiet and almost comic in its precision, about an old man who catches cicadas. You have perhaps seen the insects themselves, small, fierce summer creatures, impossibly quick on a branch, gone the instant they sense you. This man catches them on a long sticky pole, as if he is picking ripe fruit, as if the cicadas are barely even present as living things, but are simply objects at the end of his reach. Confucius watches him, astonished, asks his method. The old man says, I practiced for months. I learnt to balance 2 pellets on the tip of the pole without them falling, and then 5. When I could balance 5 without a single one rolling off, I lost only 1 cicada in 10 attempts. Then I practiced until I could balance 6, 7, 8, and now, when I go out to catch cicadas, I hold my body as still as a dead stump. My arm is like a dry branch. Though heaven and earth are vast and full of 10,000 things, I am aware of nothing but cicada wings. Nothing but cicada wings. Not the heat of the summer air, not the sound of leaves, not the other animals, the whole teeming life of the warm season. Just the wings. And from that stillness, a stillness that is not tense, not effortful, not the stillness of someone straining not to move, but the stillness of someone who has genuinely become, for these moments, as present and as quiet as an old stump in the sun. From that, the catching is easy, almost inevitable. How can I fail? He says, and he is not boasting. He is describing an absence of the conditions that would make failure possible. These 3, the swimmer, the woodcarver, the cicada catcher, are each saying the same thing in a different body, a different morning, a different kind of task. And none of them is talking about relaxing in the ordinary sense of the word, about letting go of effort or care. What they are talking about is something more like the right arrangement of attention. Everything still, except the one thing that needs to move. The heart quiet, so that the hands can see. The body absent from itself, so that the work can come through without interference. You have been moving through this book for a long time now, and your body has been growing quieter as we went, without your needing to do anything about it. This is how it works when the book works. Not instruction, not a technique to apply, just a slow accumulating of something that loosens the grip you did not know you were keeping. In the 4th chapter, there is a teaching that has a name, Xinjai, the fasting of the mind. Confucius gives it to his student, Yan Hui, before Yan Hui goes on a difficult diplomatic mission, and what Confucius says, which is, remember, the text's Confucius. Zhuang Zhou's Confucius, the one who sometimes surprises you by saying exactly the right thing, is this. Do not fast from food, he says. Fast the mind. Do not listen with the ears, listen with the mind. And do not listen with the mind. Listen with the qi, with the breath, the vital energy, the living current that moves through and is empty and waits on all things. The ears stop at hearing. The mind stops at matching what it hears to what it already knows. But qi, the breath, is empty. And the Tao gathers in what is empty. Emptiness is the fasting of the mind. You can sit with that for a moment if you want. You do not have to understand it. In fact, understanding it in the usual way, the way of passing and holding and filing, that is precisely what the fasting is asking you to stop doing. The fasting is asking you to let the ears stop at the edge of the sound rather than carrying it all the way to interpretation. To let the mind stop at the edge of the experience rather than immediately sorting it into what it already knows. To become, for a while, as the qi is, empty, moving, present without holding. Emptiness is the fasting of the mind. And Zhuang Zhou thought there was no shortage of it available to us. We do not have to make emptiness. We have to stop filling it. And then Yan Hui comes back, a different Yan Hui than the one who set out. He comes back and he tells Confucius he has been making progress. He has forgotten benevolence and rightness, he says. Confucius nods but says, "That's a start, keep going." He comes back again. He has forgotten ritual and music. "Good," says Confucius, "but not yet." And then he comes back a third time, and he says something that makes Confucius sit very still. He says, "I sit and forget." Zuo Wang, to sit and forget. He lets the body fall away. He dims perception. He drops form and knowing. He lets the mechanism of the self, the assessor, the comparer, the one who holds opinions, fall still, and then fall silent, and then fall away entirely. And what remains, when all that has dropped, is something he calls the great thoroughfare, Tatong, the vast undivided throughway, the thing you are when you have stopped being a self in particular. Confucius, who in any other text would be horrified by this, leans forward. He asks Yan Hui to teach him. He asks to become his student's follower. And you feel, reading it, that this is one of those moments when Zhuang Zhou is laughing very quietly. The most famous teacher in the history of Chinese civilization, asking the one who has learned to forget all teaching if he might sit at his feet. But the laughter is not cruel. That is the thing about Zhuang Zhou. The laughter is never cruel. It is the laughter of someone who has seen through to the absurdity of things and found it, somehow, delightful. The way it is delightful that the most useful question Huizi could ask on the bridge was the one that proved Zhuangzi already knew. The way it is delightful that the highest teaching Confucius ever received came from a student who had learned by forgetting everything his teacher taught him. Sit and forget. You are already, at this hour, most of the way there. The body has grown heavy. The sounds outside, whatever they are, have stopped being information and started being texture. You are not making this happen. It is happening to you, gently, the way all the real changes happen, wuhua, the transformation of things, which is always in motion and does not require your participation. Now come the passages that are about what comes after. And I want to tell you before we enter them that in Zhuang Zhou's telling they are not frightening. They are not solemn warnings or stages of grief. They are exactly what a book that laughs where others are serious would produce when it turns to the largest subject. Something quiet and strange and oddly consoling and funny in that particular way that only the most serious things can be funny. Huizi comes to mourn. This is the 18th chapter, and Zhuangzi's wife has died. Huizi is coming to pay his respects, to offer condolence, to do the things that a loyal friend and long-time sparring partner does when the person his friend loved most in the world is gone. He arrives and finds Zhuangzi sitting on the ground with his legs sprawled out, not kneeling in the correct mourning posture, but sprawled, carelessly, the way a man sits when he is comfortable and not performing anything. And he is drumming on a basin. tapping out a rhythm on a clay or wooden bowl, the way you tap when you are thinking of something else, the way a child taps when a song has gotten into them and they cannot help but let it out. And he is singing. Huizi is, for once, genuinely shocked. He says, "You lived with her, raised children with her. She has grown old in your company, and now she is dead. Is it not enough that you do not weep? You sit here singing and drumming. Is this not too much?" And Zhuangzi stops drumming. He looks at Huizi and says, "At first I was as anyone is. Of course I grieved. When she first died, I could not help it. But then I looked back. I looked back to before she was born. I looked back further, to before she had form. I looked back further still, to before she even had the breath that would make the form. In the vast formless flux of things, in that great churning before anything had yet become distinct, something changed, and there was breath. Something changed again, and there was form. Something changed again, and there was life. And now something has changed once more, and there is death. It is, he says, like the turning of the four seasons. Spring passes to summer, summer to autumn, autumn to winter, and we do not say the autumn has done a violence to the summer, or that the winter has made a wrong of the autumn. They turn. This is what turning is. She lies now, he says, in the great chamber. If I were to follow her with wailing and weeping, it would be a sign that I understand nothing of fate. So he stopped, and then he picked up the basin again, and tapped out the rhythm, and went back to the song. You can feel in that image something that is not the absence of love. He is not drumming because he did not care. He is drumming because he cared enough to look all the way back, past the grief, past the death, past the particular form his wife had inhabited, all the way back to before form, before breath, before life, to that formless flux from which she had come, and to which she was returning. And from that perspective, what would weeping add? She is not lost. She has become something different. The four seasons do not mourn each other. There is another passage. It is later in the same chapter, the 18th, and Zhuangzi is walking along a road, and he comes across a skull. A bare, dry skull, bleached by sun and weather, lying where it has come to rest. And Zhuangzi does what Zhuangzi does with everything he encounters, which is that he does not pass it without acknowledgement. He sits down with it. He talks to it, the way a person talks to something they are genuinely curious about. He taps it with his stick. He asks, "Did war bring you here? Did famine? Did cold? Did old age? Did some ordinary collapse of the body that just happened to leave you on this road?" He asks all the usual reasons a skull comes to be on a road, because he wants to know, because he is always wanting to know. And then evening comes, and Zhuangzi pillows his head on the skull and goes to sleep, which is another moment of that same gentle absurdity, the philosopher of transformation using a skull as a pillow, sleeping the easy sleep of someone who does not find a skull alarming when it is met with honest attention. And at midnight, the skull speaks. In a dream, which is a fitting place for a skull to speak, the skull says, "You talk the way the living always talk. You list the things that might have brought me to this. You look at me as if what I am now is a reduction from what I was. You see the hardship, but not what the hardship became. Let me tell you what it is like," says the skull. "Among the dead there is no ruler above and no subject below. There is no work of the seasons, no toil of summer planting and winter cold. We are calm as heaven and earth themselves. And even if you offered me the chance to come back, to have my body again, my home, my family, all the pleasures of the living, I would not take it. Because there is something here, in this quiet, that none of that was. You feel that, and you are still. You do not agree or disagree with the skull. You do not take it as doctrine or instruction. You simply let it be what it is, one voice in the book's long chorus of voices, each speaking from its own hollow, each saying its own thing, and the question of who is right or what it means left as open as the piping of heaven, which uses all the hollows and cannot be identified with any one of them. The skull is not telling you what to believe about death. It is telling you what this particular skull, at this particular moment, in this particular story, found when it arrived, which is calm, which is an ease so large that the life before it seemed, looking back, frenetic by comparison. And whether or not that is what waits, what matters for right now is the image, something vast and quiet, open as heaven and earth, without the toil of the seasons. You can borrow the image without signing anything. Zhuangzi dies in the 32nd chapter, the last of the miscellaneous chapters, and he dies exactly as you would expect him to, which is without ceremony and with a kind of composed, good-humoured refusal of the fuss his students want to make. He is dying, and his students want to arrange a proper burial. A grand burial, the kind that says something about who he was. And he says, no. He says, heaven and earth are my coffin. The sun and the moon are my paired jade discs, the beautiful stones placed in the hands or over the eyes of the honoured dead. The stars are my pearls and precious stones. All of the 10,000 things, the whole of creation, are my mourners. What could be missing from a burial like that? What could my funeral possibly lack? His students are worried. They say, Master, we are afraid that without a proper burial the crows and vultures will eat your body. And he says, above ground the crows and vultures will eat me. Below ground the ants will eat me. Why do you want to rob the one and feed the other? Which is funny, which is genuinely funny, in the way that only a man who has looked at things very clearly can make a joke out of his own death that is also, at the same time, a philosophical argument, and also an expression of ease so thorough that it does not distinguish between itself and the world. He is not his body. He never was just his body. Heaven and earth are his coffin, and the sun and moon are his grave goods, and the 10,000 things will mourn him, and what more could anyone ask? Let the crows have their share. Now, before we let the last wind through the hollows, there is one more tale. It is the last story in the 7th chapter, the last of the inner chapters, and it is very short, and it is the gentlest of all the cautions. There were 3 emperors, and their names are almost untranslatable into English, because they are not really names in the ordinary sense, they are qualities. The emperor of the south was called Shu, which means something like brief or swiftness. The emperor of the north was called Hu, which means sudden. And the emperor of the centre was called Hundun, which means chaos. Not chaos in the sense of disorder or violence, but something more like the unformed, the undifferentiated, the original state before distinctions have been made, the great wholeness before things have been separated into this and that. Hundun, with its gentle rolling sound, Hundun. Shu and Hu often visited the land of the centre, and Hundun was always kind to them, always generous, always the perfect host. And Shu and Hu were grateful. They wanted to repay him. So they put their heads together and thought about what they could give him. Everyone, they reasoned, has 7 openings. eyes to see with, ears to hear with, nostrils to breathe through, a mouth to eat and speak. 7 holes, 7 ways in which the world enters the body, and the body enters the world. But Hundun had none of these. He was smooth and undivided, complete in his way, but closed to the outside, unable to see or hear or breathe or taste. "We will give him openings," said Shu and Hu. "We will bore them for him, 1 each day, 7 days, 7 holes, so that he can experience all the things we experience." And so they set to work with the best intentions. Day 1, a hole. Day 2, another. Day 3, day 4, day 5, 6, 7. On the 7th day, Hundun died. That is the whole story. And what killed him was not malice. What killed him was improvement. The love that has to fix what is complete. The kindness that cannot leave whole things whole. Shu and Hu meant only good. They looked at Hundun and saw what he was missing, and because they loved him, they could not help themselves. They bored the holes. And the boring of the holes was the end of Hundun, because Hundun was not something with 7 holes who had inexplicably been born without them. Hundun was the kind of thing that had no holes. He was the original, the undifferentiated, the vast complete. And once you start boring holes in that, once you start dividing the undivided, opening the unopened, making distinctions in the distinction free, there is no going back, and the original thing is gone. It is a story about a certain kind of tenderness, not the tenderness that says, "You are fine as you are," not permission to be sloppy or unconscious, just the recognition that not everything needs to be opened and examined and made useful in the ordinary way. Some things are complete in their own form, and the 7 holes you would bore in them are not gifts. And what is one of those things? The self, perhaps, when it finally lets go. The quiet mind in the last watch of the night. The dreaming creature who cannot say for certain whether it is a man or a butterfly. Whatever is happening in you right now, at this particular threshold between waking and not, leave it whole. The wind is dying in the hollows of the great clod, the way Ziki said it would, the way it always does eventually. The hooting falls off first, that low resonant one from the hollow like a nose, then the roaring, from the hollow like a mouth, then the whistling, high and thin, from the hollow like an ear. One by one they soften and subside, not because something has silenced them, but because the breath that was moving through has gentled. And a sound that needed force to exist finds itself without enough of it to keep going. The sobbing and moaning and the muffled plucking sounds, all the 10,000 different cries that the 10,000 different hollows were producing, these fall quiet too. And when the last of them has gone, there is no absence. There is just the quiet that was already underneath all of it. The quiet that was there before the breath came through and will be there after. This is the piping of heaven. Not a sound, but the capacity for all sounds. Not a thing you can point to, but the fact that there are hollows at all, that something moves through them, that the world is shaped in such a way that a breath becomes a voice, and then falls silent, and the world is still the world. You are still the world. You have been here all evening with these stories, with a great bird climbing 90,000 miles. With a cook who has not dulled a blade in 19 years, with a tree that lived 1,000 years precisely by being impossible to use, with 2 friends on a bridge disputing the happiness of fish. You have sat with a sage who this morning lost himself, with a man who follows the way of the water through falls where nothing else survives, with a woodcarver who forgets his own body to find what is hidden in the grain of a tree, with an old man still as a stump, with nothing in his world but cicada wings. You have been with Zhuangzi at his wife's death. with the skull at midnight, calm as heaven and earth, with the dying philosopher for whom the sun and moon are grave goods enough. And none of it was argument. None of it was instruction. None of it was asking you to believe something, or to change something, or to understand something you did not understand before. Each tale was just a hollow, shaped to let a particular breath move through and make its particular sound. And then it quieted, and the next one came. And now the last one has quieted too. The butterfly is still somewhere in here, in the soft of what you are carrying into sleep. The creature who flew, happy, knowing nothing of Zhuang Zhou. You and it are still connected by that one hinge, that single place where the two stories almost but don't quite explain each other, the transformation of things, wuhua. The going across that does not need a passport, because the difference between the one who crosses and the thing being crossed was always more porous than it seemed. You do not need to decide tonight. You never needed to decide. The not deciding is part of the teaching, if teaching is even the right word, and you are already doing it. You are already letting the boundary be as soft as it is. The cook's blade is thin as no thickness. The swimmer follows the swirl. The woodcarver brings heaven and meets heaven. And you are letting the grip loosen on the last things you were still holding. The small matters and the large ones, the details of the day, the questions that seemed to need answering before you could rest. They are still there if you want them in the morning. The morning is very good at receiving the things you set down at night. It holds them without fuss. What Zhuang Zhou found, wandering in that 4th century Bjie through the conversations and stories and absurdities of the world he lived in, the lacquer garden at Mong, the conversations with Huizi on bridges, the dreams, was something that refused to stay formal. The Tao Te Ching had said profound things in compressed aphorism. Zhuang Zhou told stories. He let a cook explain what a king couldn't find in governance. He let a useless tree explain what useful trees had never managed to say. He let the fish explain from below what the sage could only see from above. He let the dead skull give comfort that the living couldn't offer. The whole of it is the wandering. The free and easy wandering of the first chapter's title, Xiaoyaoyu, which is not a destination and not a method, it is a quality of movement. Unhurried, following the way as it opens, trusting the seams and the gaps, not hacking, only guiding, not fighting the swirl, only moving with the swell, not boring holes in Hundun, only letting what is whole remain whole. The book closes on something small. Everything large has already been said. What remains is the sound of a man who found, in his actual life, in the day's work, in the arguments with his friend, in the loss of his wife, in the prospect of his own death, enough material to spend a whole lifetime wandering through without ever reaching the end of it. He was not a sage in the way the word usually means. He was too quick to laugh for that, too fond of the ridiculous, too willing to let Confucius be right when Confucius was right and wrong when he was wrong, too interested in cooks and wheelwrights and old men with sticky poles to pretend that wisdom lives only at the top. He was, perhaps, the freest of all the voices in the long tradition, not because he escaped from anything, but because he never needed to. The world he was in, the difficult, violent, uncertain world of the warring states, was already, seen clearly enough, the thing the butterfly was dreaming, was already the great transformation in motion, was already full of hollow spaces that the right breath, moving through, could make sing. You are in one of those spaces now. The bamboo of your thoughts is still tonight, or nearly still, the way the grove goes quiet after the wind has passed through. The minnows that were darting and playing are resting now, somewhere in the calm of the dark water, and whether they are happy is a question that can wait until morning, when the sun comes back and the current picks up again, and the whole small energetic world of the river resumes. For now the river is quiet. The tree that no one wants to cut stands undisturbed in its glade. Enormous and unhurried, its roots going deep into what does not change. The cook has set down the knife. The wheelwright has gone home. The skull is calm as heaven and earth in the dark by the road. The pengbird is very high up, so high that if you were below it, looking up, you would not be able to see it, only the darkening of the sky as its shadow passes, so gradual you might not notice. So large it changes the quality of the light for a moment, and then is gone, and the sky is just the sky again, and the bird is gone on toward the southern deep. The little dove on the elm does not see it go. It has already forgotten the laughter. You are one of the hollows. Something is moving through you, gently, as it always has been. In a few moments you will not be awake enough to call it anything. The transformation of things requires nothing of you. The 4 seasons turn without your help. The seams and the gaps are already there. You do not need to find them. You only need to stop filling them. Let it all relax away. Subject closed for the night.